let folks filter in. Great, it's good to see people joining us. We're going to get started in a couple seconds here. This is the WHIAAPI community policy briefing. So hopefully you have joined the right call and meeting. It looks like we have about 238 participants at this time. I do want to make a couple of announcements that this event is closed to the press. And I just want to note that there is a chat function for the attendees and for the speakers here on the screen. So please note that there is a chat, and we want to make this event somewhat interactive. And we do have Becky Lizama from the WHIAAPI team managing the chat. So you know, whatever you write in here today, we will have a record of it, and we will go back and take a look at your comments today. So we appreciate you answering some of the questions in there. And even the speakers here today, you know, as they have time, they may pop in and say hello to the attendees as well. And for the speakers, if you could, if you haven't already, please add your titles and your organizations as well. We will get started here in a second. I'm having a little bit of tech issues, so we'll get started in a second. All right, okay, let's get started, everybody. Happy Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Laura Shin, and I'm the Acting Executive Director of the White House Initiative on APIs, or WHIAAPI, located in the Washington, D.C. area. It has been quite a May Heritage Month this year, with so many thoughtful and interesting events that were put together, responding to the anti-Asian hate and violence, as well as a pandemic that has been an unfortunate part of our May this year. This is not a Heritage Month that we will soon forget. So although there have been challenges this year, the community has risen up against insurmountable odds to combat hate, with so many leaders standing up in the community, whether it's making sure that everyone gets vaccinated or making sure that our elders have someone to walk them home from the grocery store. I am so proud to be part of this resourceful, innovative, and pivotal community and generation that is at the cusp of so many things. Today, we are here to focus on the administration's response to the increasing anti-Asian hate. On March 30th, 2021, President Biden released an API fact sheet that announced additional actions to respond to anti-Asian violence, xenophobia, and bias. We are here today to bring that fact sheet to life by introducing you to the people that are working on these issues and to hear from senior administration officials about how their agencies can meet the needs of the AA and NHPI community. As you saw the splash screen at the beginning of the call, the roadmap for today. We have a great lineup of senior administration officials today for about the first 30 minutes of the call, and then we will move to a roundtable format with agency staff and community leaders introducing themselves and sharing the work that they are doing. And then we will have a chance for the community leaders to ask a question to the administration staff that is working on the API fact sheet. So at this time, I am thrilled to introduce Erica Moritzugu, who is in such a critical role in this period in history. Erica Moritzugu was appointed by President Joe Biden on April 2021 to serve as Deputy Assistant to the President and Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Senior Liaison. With a distinguished career in the federal government and nonprofit advocacy, she has spent her professional and personal life fighting for social justice and the empowerment of communities and individuals. At the White House, Erica supports the administration on a wide array of the president's priorities and engages with AA and NHPI communities and leaders on important issues, such as advancing safety, justice, inclusion, and opportunity for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities through a whole of government approach to racial justice. Her past government service includes serving as the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations at the Department of Housing and Urban Development under the leadership of Secretary Julian Castro in the Obama administration, and was the first ever Senate Deputy Legislative Director at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. On Capitol Hill, she was a senior representative of Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, Senator Daniel Keokaka of Hawaii, and at the Senate Democratic Policy Committee under Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada. In the nonprofit sector, Erica led two teams, the National Partnership for Women and Families for Economic Justice and Congressional Relations Advancing Workforce and Health Policies, focused through a gender equity and race equity lens. Erica has also led the Government Relations, Advocacy, and Community Engagement team at the Anti-Defamation League, a leading anti-hate organization. So with that, I am so proud to introduce our leader and friend, Erica Moritzugu.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura, for putting this program together and for all of your leadership at WHIAAPI. Good morning. I'm zooming in from Washington, D.C., the ancestral lands of the Nacotch Tank. And I'm coming into this new position that Laura described at a time of persistent anti-Asian hate and violence. And during a pandemic that's taken a severe economic and personal toll on the AA and NHPI communities, just as it's impacted so. I'll work to address the needs of the AA and NHPI communities by working closely with the White House of Public Engagement, Howard O., who we're going to hear from a little bit later. And he works to include the national AA and NHPI organizations. And then, of course, with Laura at WHIAAPI, which connects the AA and NHPI communities to the resources of the federal government. So as Laura had mentioned, I've spent my entire life as a professional and a volunteer fighting for the issues that matter to our communities. And I'll continue to do that from the White House with the confidence of a president and a vice president who see us and hear us and value us and are deeply committed to providing us with the safety and opportunity that we should expect and can hope for now. On his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order advancing racial equity throughout the federal government. His first week in office, in response to the spike in anti-Asian hate and violence, the president acted quickly and resolutely by issuing a presidential memorandum condemning racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against the AA and NHPI communities. In March, he issued the fact sheet aggregating the further actions he's taken to combat hate and address health disparities for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, including actions that we'll hear about today by the Department of Justice, HHS, and others. And just last week, I think it was just last week, the president signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law, which passed in the Congress by an overwhelming margin. And this critical new law will bring our nation one step closer to achieving justice and equality for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. You should also know that the White House has been having conversations with all segments of the AA and NHPI communities regarding equity in the federal government, and will work hand in hand with our communities and within our communities to find solutions to the problems and challenges that are facing us today. Now, although the communities had a difficult year of pain and fear, this is also the time to take today to recognize that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across our nation have a long history of achievement and perseverance. I hope we can embrace the noble examples of leadership, resilience, and courage shown by AAN and HPI communities and recommit to the work that needs to be done to ensure our safety, justice, equity, and opportunity. So with that, mahalo nui loa for the opportunity to join you today. And it is my honor now to introduce Secretary Javier Becerra. Secretary Becerra is the 25th leader of the Department of Health and Human Services and the first Latino to hold the office in the history of the United States. A leader in the Latino and for the AAN and HPI communities during his 12 terms in the Congress. He's also been a defender and promoter of justice as California AG. Now he carries out President Biden's vision to build a healthy America, and his work will focus on ensuring that all Americans have health, security, and access to healthcare. Throughout his career, the Secretary has made it his priority to ensure that Americans have access to the affordable healthcare they need to survive and thrive. From his early days as a legal advocate representing individuals with mental illness to his role as the Attorney General of the state of California. With that, Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Erica, thank you, to Laura, and to everyone who is joining this event. And it is a thrill to see so many familiar faces and to get to work with you again. And so get ready, we've got some battles ahead of us. I want to begin by saying that the work that is so fundamental to the well-being and health of our communities starts in the streets and of our neighborhoods and extends to initiatives such as this one. It starts with our families on the ground who are the first to experience the effects of policies that are not geared towards us. And it starts with them because they are the first agents of change that we need. And it continues to all of us who are here today, who are tasked with making the change a reality. Growing up, I think you've heard this story if you've been around me for a while. My father used to tell of the times when, as a young man, he couldn't walk into restaurants and establishments because of the signs that said no dogs or Mexicans allowed. This is a man who, for many of his years, picked the very food that was in those establishments being served for meals for people. But yet again, the doors were closed to him. Today, those signs have been taken down because of people like my father, because of community leaders like you, and because those of you who are on this call believe it's important to always push for people like my father. And so today, we now look to our government under President Biden's leadership to show that we can take the actions that take those kinds of signs down for all Americans. But signs of exclusion and racism still exist, and they don't just affect our social fabric, but our health. For 15 months, the Asian American community has faced two plagues, the COVID-19 pandemic and racist, xenophobic violence and bias. As President Biden has said so well, racism is the ugly poison that has long haunted and plagued our nation. And just as we are determined to beat COVID-19, I can tell you right now, we are determined to beat anti-Asian violence and xenophobia in all its forms. The president has moved swiftly and urgently towards this end. I know you're aware of this. He started by building an administration which has 15% of its appointees who are Asian American and Pacific Islanders. He made clear that condemnation of anti-Asian bias and violence is the official policy of the Biden-Harris administration. He signed the COVID-19 hate crimes bill that addresses hate crimes throughout the pandemic with emphasis on the increases in violence against Asian Americans. And he's empowered HHS, my department, to take on this fight. We at HHS are allocating more than $49 million from the American Rescue Plan to a new grant program for community-based, culturally specific services and programs for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. This program will expand services to domestic violence survivors from Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. We've also launched efforts in response to the president's memorandum condemning and combating racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US. Through these efforts, we will issue guidance on best practices to advance cultural competence, language access, and sensitivity toward Asian American and Pacific Islanders in the context, of course, of the federal COVID-19 response. And the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force has been established. And within that, we have at HHS established a subcommittee on structural drivers of health inequity and xenophobia, which will provide recommendations to ensure that our federal government's response to COVID-19 mitigates anti-Asian xenophobia and bias. And we'll also advance health equity for specific Asian American communities, including Pacific Islander and Native American communities who have disproportionately felt the impact and have died from COVID-19. Many years ago, my dad couldn't walk into many restaurants because of the color of his skin or because of his language differences or his national origin. But those doors that were close to him were opened by communities who wouldn't let racism and xenophobia prevail. That's why we're here, to open doors to good health and to well-being for our API brothers and sisters. And I must tell you that now into my third month, I am absolutely looking forward to working with you to continue to open those doors, because we know that there are still people who would like to place that sign outside that would tell us that we don't belong. It's time. We're ready. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you for letting me join you today.
Thank you so much, Secretary Becerra, and thank you so much for your work and your leadership, and we look forward to working with you closely in the HHS and everything you do. Hi, everybody. My name is Howard O, and I'm the Associate Director for the White House Office of Public Engagement. This May, during Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we recognize the history and achievements of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders all across our nation. And as Erica said, in the midst of a difficult year of pain and fear, we reflect on the tradition of leadership, resilience, and courage shown by our AA and HPI communities, and we recommit to the struggle for AA and HPI equity. We also celebrate and honor the invaluable contributions of the AA and HPI communities who have made our nation's culture and arts in law, science, technology, sports, and public service, including the courageous AA and HPIs who have served on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic as healthcare providers, first responders, teachers, and other essential workers. And during this year's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, our nation also celebrates the achievements of Vice President Harris, the first person of South Asian descent to hold the office of the Vice President. Vice President Harris has blazed a trail and set an example for young people across our country to aspire to follow, including members of the AA and HPI communities and AA and HPI women in particular. And as you all may have seen last week, the president is an administration of his word. Just last Thursday, he signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed by overwhelming margin. And in addition, we continue to discuss the president's bold vision for the country and his American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, and American Families Plan, which are once-in-a-generation investments in the nation's future. The American Jobs Plan creating millions of good jobs, American Families Plan that invests in helping families cover basic expenses that so many are struggling with now, and not to mention the president's commitment in ensuring our country is vaccinated and safe. President Biden also announced the goal of 70% of US adult population to have one vaccine shot and 160 million US adults to be fully vaccinated by July 4th, so that life can start to look closer to normal. So getting vaccinated has never been easier. We're about 80,000 locations where you can get a shot, and 90% of where you live are within 5 miles of one of those locations. And you can find a vaccine site near you by texting your zip code to 438829. Again, that's 438829, just your zip code and your number, and you'll get all the places near you. And most places don't require an appointment. You just walk in, get your vaccine shot, it's free, and everyone 12 years or older are eligible. And also, as Laura and Erica and everybody here has mentioned, this is a very historic and very important Heritage Month. And so we have a lot of surprises for you all. In the East Wing, we've installed AAPI artifacts from the Smithsonian, in which attendees who attended the bill signing ceremony last week were able to physically tour, but also we have a virtual tour coming very soon, later this week, that we're revealing. And also the White House has partnered with NEH and the Center for Asian American Media on a Heritage Month video to be broadcasted on PBS, which will include pre-recorded remarks from President Biden and the First Lady, and also closing remarks from Vice President Harris and the Second Gentleman. And this is broadcasted on Monday. So on that note, I have the very distinct honor of introducing Associate Attorney General Benita Gupta. Associate Attorney General Benita Gupta is an experienced leader and litigator who has devoted her entire career to civil rights work. From October 2014 to January 2017, she served as Acting Assistant Attorney General and head of the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Appointed by President Barack Obama as the Chief Civil Rights Prosecutor for the United States, Gupta oversaw a wide range of criminal and civil enforcement efforts to ensure equal justice and protect an equal opportunity for all during one of the most consequential periods for the division. Gupta began her legal career as attorney at the NAAPI Legal Defense Fund, an education fund where she successfully led the effort to overturn the wrongful drug convictions of 30 individuals in Tulia, Texas, who were ultimately pardoned by Governor Rick Perry. With that, the honor of introducing Associate Attorney General Benita Gupta.
Thank you so much, Howard, and thank you for the invitation to this important event and the opportunity to provide some remarks and introduce greetings from the Attorney General of the United States. One thing the Attorney General and I actually have in common is that New Jersey Senator Cory Booker asked us a very similar question during our confirmation hearings just weeks ago, and frankly, nearly made both of us cry. But the senator asked us about our families and how our family histories motivated us personally. And when I began to answer the question, I was really filled with emotion. I spoke about how deeply grateful and proud I am of my parents, my immigrant parents from India, who throughout their lives have modeled a profound appreciation of the promise of this country and whose unadulterated love and support for me and my sister spurred both of us on into a life of public service. I had the honor, as Howard mentioned, of previously leading the Justice Department Civil Rights Division during a period when we investigated and prosecuted a record number of hate crimes, including crimes committed against Sikh individuals and members of other immigrant communities. We at that time had launched a special initiative to assist law enforcement partners' ability to prevent, investigate, and educate communities about hate and hate crimes. And weeks ago, I'm today in my fourth week, I returned to the Justice Department. It's an institution that I love dearly to continue the work of justice. It was just weeks after terrible events in Atlanta. And this time I was returning to be the number 3 in the Justice Department as the first daughter of immigrants and the first AAPI ever confirmed to this position. And I'm never going to forget my parents' pride when I was sworn in as Associate Attorney General of the United States. It's the same country that welcomed them so many years ago. When Attorney General Garland was asked a similar question at his confirmation hearing about his family, he was filled with emotion too. And he spoke about how his grandparents fled anti-Semitism and persecution from Eastern Europe and how this country took them in and protected them. And he shared moving remarks about how he felt a deep, deep obligation to serve this country with the best of his abilities and to protect all communities. We are all too well aware of the current surge of anti-AAPI hate and xenophobia and polarization that is plaguing our country right now. And the Justice Department is bringing a renewed and robust commitment to reinvigorate hate crimes and anti-discrimination, civil rights enforcement, and also to assist communities through grant programs and providing resources and tools so that the Justice Department and other federal agencies can work together to protect and support members of the AAPI community. Just recently, the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights recently released new resources in 5 languages for students and families that are confronting harassment and bullying. And the president, as others have mentioned, recently signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which strengthens hate crimes reporting, training, and prevention, and makes the Justice Department's tools to do everything we can to protect communities that much stronger and more robust. I was really honored and very moved to be at the White House last week for the bill signing and to hear the president double down on his commitment personally to do everything he can and the administration can to combat hate. And then also to hear how the bill really enforces the Justice Department's tools to keep communities safe. It was a really powerful moment, and it was a testament to the unity of the federal government, of activists and communities like all of you around the country that are working so hard in your communities to protect our community and end the hate and to bring the country together. And so the Justice Department will do all that we can to combat the surge in hate crimes targeting the AAPI community. I will be working personally with a number of the components within the Justice Department to implement these measures to stop AAPI hate and ensure that our communities are heard and protected. You know, on the surface, the Attorney General's story and mine appear in some ways quite different, but they are also quite similar in a lot of important ways. I think they speak to the promise of America and how, while we were all once strangers too, we were welcome to a country that at its best celebrates our differences and says that we are all afforded equal rights and equal dignity. Those rights don't protect themselves. And that is something that we all have to be vigilant about and work together to ensure that communities are safe. I'm incredibly proud and humbled to serve in this Justice Department and to serve with this Attorney General. And I'm honored now to introduce this message from the Attorney General of the United States as we commemorate AAPI Heritage Month. Thank you.
43 years ago, congressional action ensured that each May would be marked by recognition and celebration of the enormous contributions that the Asian American and Pacific Islander community has made to our nation. It is particularly important to pause and acknowledge those contributions now. As we near what we hope are the closing months of this disastrous pandemic, we must also acknowledge the acute and unique suffering of the AAPI community throughout this crisis. Alarmingly, we have seen a substantial increase in hate crimes and bias-related incidents against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. This is not the first time that a national crisis has led to abuse of the AAPI community. I truly hope it is the last. But acknowledgement and hope mean little without commitment and action. I am honored to be part of an administration that is committed to taking action to protect and promote the safety and well-being of the AAPI community. In his first week in office, President Biden called on the Justice Department to take concrete steps to respond to anti-Asian discrimination and violence, including by expanding the public reporting of hate incidents against AAPI individuals. In my first directive to the entire Justice Department as Attorney General, I ordered an internal review to determine how the department can increase its ability to identify and respond to acts of hate and bias. Those broad efforts are ongoing. Today, I want to highlight just two of several actions that the Justice Department has taken in response to the President's January 26th memorandum. First, we know that hate crimes and bias-related incidents are underreported. Lack of reporting means too many incidents go unrecognized and unaddressed. Language access is a critical barrier to reporting. Individuals with limited English ability have difficulty getting information and communicating when they've been victimized. As a first step toward ameliorating the problem, the Justice Department's website had added pages to provide basic information about hate crimes and how to report hate crimes in 5 of the most frequently spoken AAPI languages: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. Instructions on reporting hate crimes then send victims to qualified interpreters staffing the FBI hotline. Second, giving Asian American and Pacific Islanders victims the information they need and helping build the necessary trust to report attacks when they happen are not enough. Although many police departments are already equipped to recognize and combat hate crimes, some are not. The department's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services has developed a new training curriculum to help law enforcement respond to, investigate, and report acts of hate. Between June and November, the FBI will hold 6 regional trainings to promote and improve the ability of state and local law enforcement to identify, report, and respond to hate crimes. The trainings will be held in Denver, Louisville, New Orleans, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Tampa. All will include sessions that recognize the importance of reporting anti-Asian bias. The remarkable and diverse history, culture, achievements, and contributions of the AAPI community have strengthened America, and they are essential to our future. The Justice Department will continue to aggressively combat the senseless hate crimes and bias-related incidents that target the AAPI community and tear at the fabric of our nation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ben Raju, and I am the District Director for the U.S. Small Business Administration in Los Angeles. But I also have the wonderful opportunity to serve as your Regional Network Co-Chair for the White House Initiative for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. It is an amazing opportunity to be here today to celebrate AANHPI month alongside all of you today. It is my honor to get an opportunity to introduce NEH Acting Chairman, Adam Wolfson. Adam Wolfson is the Assistant Chairman for the programs and current Acting Chairman of the NEH. He has previously served as Directors of NEH's Division of Research, as well as Editor of the Public Interest. And he has held the position of Lecturer in the MA in Government Programs at Johns Hopkins University. He is a government servant and has been the visiting assistant professor of government in Claremont McKenna College, Washington, D.C. program. He is also co-editor of The Liberal Tradition in Focus and author of Persecution or Toleration and Explication of Locke-Prost's Quarrel, 1689 to 1704. Adam holds a BA in history from Harvard University and his PhD in political science for the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Acting Chairman of the NEH, Mr. Adam Wolfson. Chairman, I think you're still on mute, sir.
Thanks. Let me start again. Hello, everyone. I'm Adam Wolfson, Acting Chair of the NEH. It is truly an honor to be here today to represent NEH, the federal agency charged with promoting excellence in the humanities and conveying the lessons of history to all Americans. Like everyone here, we at NEH have been alarmed by the rise in intolerance, racism, and xenophobia against Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander people and their families and businesses. We have been alarmed by the increased threats and violence against Asian Americans, including the horrific murder of 6 Asian American women in Atlanta in March of this year. Immediately after the attacks, NEH published an online virtual bookshelf of federally funded projects that illuminate the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander experience and celebrate the history and contributions of these communities in shaping the American story. This repository of resources represents NEH's extensive record of funding in this area, as well as our ongoing commitment to bringing quality projects about the culture, history, and accomplishments of AANHPI people to the American public. NEH was especially proud to sponsor the landmark 5-hour PBS documentary series, Asian Americans, produced by WHIAAPI and the Center for Asian American Media. The series, which premiered in May 2020, chronicles 150 years of immigration, racial politics, international relations, and cultural innovation, told through the individual lives and family stories of the generations of Asian Americans who have helped define who we are as a nation. We were pleased that in responding to the Atlanta shootings, PBS chose to re-release the Asian Americans and make the series free to stream online. NEH's founding legislation states that democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens. We believe resources such as these that document, enhance, and promote understanding of the history of our nation's diverse communities are vital in combating bias, racism, and lack of knowledge, and fostering the wisdom that undergirds a strong democracy. In this effort, we are pleased to join with the many federal agencies represented here today. Defeating intolerance towards Asian American and Pacific Islanders requires cooperation and collaboration across all levels of government. We hope that the many NEH-funded projects on AANHPI history and culture, product of US tax dollars at work, will serve as a resource not only for the public, but for our colleagues at other agencies working towards these same goals. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chairman Wolfson, for your service and leadership. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Chang, and I have the great pleasure of serving along with Ben Raju as the co-chair for the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders Regional Network. My home agency is with the Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division, where I serve as the Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Coordinator. Along with Laura Shin, Erica Moritzugu, Howard O, and the President Advisory Commission, senior level appointees who make up the Interagency Working Group, and hundreds of regional network members and the regional leads from all parts of the federal government in all 10 federal regions. We want to let everyone know that we are a team that brings the access of the federal government to your communities. As you know, WHIAAPI started in the Clinton administration, and after listening to the needs of the community that for the access to the federal government was a recurring theme, WHIAAPI started the regional network in 2014. The call went out across the federal government and hundreds responded. Today, the regional network is in all 10 regions, and we encourage you to connect with your local regional network leads. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce the Honorable Seturaman Panchanathan. He is the 15th Director of the U.S. National Science Foundation, NSF. He is a world-renowned computer scientist and engineer. Dr. Panchanathan has a distinguished career in science, technology, engineering, and education that spans more than 3 decades. He serves as the Executive Vice President of Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he also founded the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing. Prior to becoming director of NSF, Dr. Panchanathan served on the National Science Board for 6 years and has also served and chaired numerous high-level research and innovation organizations. He is a fellow of the National Academy of Innovations, the American Association for Advancement of Science, the Association for Computing Machinery, and other prestigious science and engineering organizations. Please give a warm welcome to the Honorable Dr. Seturaman Panchanathan.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm truly honored and delighted to join you all today to celebrate the countless accomplishments and contributions of people from Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities across our great nation. It has been fantastic, I'll tell you, hearing the remarks from today's guest speakers, and I look forward to the panel discussion later, led by our own AD of Social Behavioral Sciences, Skip Lupia. First of all, I want to say, I am delighted, and I want to express my gratitude, my thanks to the Biden-Harris administration for prioritizing accessibility, inclusion, and opportunity for people from all backgrounds and communities. As an Asian American immigrant who has truly benefited from the amazing opportunities available in this great nation, this is very, very personal to me. This is very personal to me. I came to do this job at NSF because I have personally benefited from our nation's belief in meritocracy and opportunity for all. The belief that no matter who you are or where you come from, if you're willing to do hard work, you can achieve amazing things. That if you have the God-given talent and you're able to exercise that with your innovative spirit, you can achieve amazing things. I am deeply grateful for the opportunities our nation has provided me, and therefore I feel compelled to make it a priority that the same access to opportunity is available to absolutely everyone and anyone who is determined to ensure that their talent are expressed and given the opportunity to express itself in unimaginable ways. And so I want to make sure that that happens in every form through whatever I do. at NSF and outside. We must give every Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander the chance to contribute to the achievements and growth of our great nation. We all know through diversity, accessibility, and inclusion, we can unleash the potential of all Americans throughout the United States. When we empower the individual to access an opportunity, believe me, I've seen it firsthand many, many times, their ideas and successes benefit not only themselves, but their peers, their communities, and the entire nation. So I tell you, I promise, I stand ready as a director of the National Science Foundation to do everything to ensure inclusivity for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders throughout the STEM community. One of the first things that I did when I took over as director of NSF was to put a racial equity task force in place right away so that we understand the barriers for opportunity and how can we motivate, inspire, and make possible the amazing talent expressing itself, as I said, in unimaginable ways. I can assure you, therefore, NSF will continue to work hard to make sure that every person from every corner of the US has a chance to excel. The API community, I can assure you that you will have this chance to excel. We have already seen so many amazing breakthroughs and accomplishments in the communities we are here to celebrate today, and there are unbelievable things yet to come. So it is truly an honor here to celebrate the many achievements of the AAPI community and to discuss the work that is being done to create a more diverse and inclusive future for all. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thanks, Laura and the team, for putting this together. I am truly grateful to every one of you. And I hope to engage with you as you plan your subsequent actions and events. And you have my full support and participation to ensure that we achieve the goal, the amazing goal that the Biden-Harris administration has set forth. We should all work together to make that reality. So I would like to hand it over to our moderator, Laura Shin.
Thank you, Director Panchanathan. I am inspired truly and ready to go conquer the world now. Thank you for your inspiring words. So that concludes our list of senior administration speakers today. Thank you so much. We are going to move now to our roundtable session. And we had a lot of important things to talk about, so we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we'll make it up in the roundtable, just keep things moving. So we do want to introduce our government officials and staff here who work with the senior administration officials at the agencies mentioned in the President Biden's API fact sheet. And then we will introduce the community organizations that are here with us today. So let's first start on the agency side. Let's start with, I'm going to call your name, and if you could provide your full name, your title, and the organization you're with, and you'll have a few minutes to talk about the work that you're doing related to President Biden's API fact sheet. So let's start with HHS, Juliet Bowie.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Juliet Bowie, and I'm a public health advisor with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health. It is truly an honor to be here on behalf of HHS and to share more about our efforts to address these critical issues and to have a conversation with AA and HPI community leaders. As Secretary Becerra stated earlier, HHS is committed to combating racism and xenophobia. We understand that racism affects health, and we are dedicated to our mission to ensure good health and well-being for AA and HPIs and all peoples. The Secretary also mentioned the HHS work group focused on response to the memorandum condemning and combating racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against AAPIs in the United States. And I have the honor of leading that work group, which is comprised of representatives from across the department. Yesterday, we had the privilege of engaging in conversation with leaders from national AAPI organizations to hear their input and thoughts to help inform our work to issue guidance on best practices to advance cultural competency, language access, and sensitivity towards APIs in the context of the federal COVID-19 response aligned with the memorandum's directives. We plan to continue to gather input from the AA and HPI community to inform our work. And we do look forward to sharing the best practices guidance in the future. It's our hope that such guidance can help ensure an equitable and effective COVID-19 response and recovery, but also serve as part of a comprehensive focus at the department on advancing health equity and racial equity. In that vein, our HHS Office for Civil Rights is focused on strengthening enforcement of anti-discrimination requirements as it relates to the pandemic and beyond. We also look forward to forthcoming recommendations from the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force, on which you can find meeting and other information on our OMH website. The task force will be meeting tomorrow, and we'll share interim recommendations from the subcommittee on structural drivers and xenophobia. We know that the challenges that we're seeing today did not begin at the start of the pandemic and are rooted in a long history of intolerance and systemic inequities. Turning the tide on these persistent issues takes committed and concrete action. And we're dedicated at HHS to assessing our programs, our policies and processes, and addressing barriers to full and equal participation by all. And we've launched efforts to do so. We're also applying the lens of racism as a public health issue, as evidenced through initiatives like the CDC's Racism and Health Initiative and the NIH Unite Initiative. We also know that there's a long history of dedicated work by individuals and organizations such as yours to fight racism, to address health disparities, and to ensure the voices of AA and HPIs are heard. A meaningful partnership with the community is essential to identifying and addressing needs and making sustained change. So we are looking forward to continuing to work with you as we move forward in our work to address anti-Asian racism, xenophobia, and intolerance, and to support the nation's health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet, for the work that you're doing with outreach to the API community and getting feedback from them, and really trying to work with them to incorporate your guidance. And we, Juliet did mention that there is a COVID equity task force, health equity task force meeting tomorrow. That's the 28th from 2 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And if you go on the Office of Minority Health website, you can actually join that public meeting. And we wanted to have someone from the task force today, but unfortunately there were conflicts. I do want to mention that the chair of the structural driver subcommittee that's mentioned in the API fact sheet is a woman named Hae-Young Yoon. And so we're going to hope to engage with her in the future as we have more meetings with the community. So with that, I'm going to then turn to Sheila from the Department of Justice.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. I'm Sheila Foran, and I'm the acting head of the Policy and Strategy Section, Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice. As you can tell from the remarks of AG Garland and the Associate Attorney General Gupta, the Justice Department has mounted a really robust, multi-pronged response to the rise in anti-Asian and xenophobia, anti-Asian violence and xenophobia over the last year. And now with the passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act that several people have mentioned, we really have a whole new range of tools to combat hate crimes. And one of the first actions that we took at the Department of Justice in response to the President's directive in January was to reconvene the department's Hate Crimes Enforcement and Prevention Initiative. So this initiative is it's a department-wide effort. It involves major components of DOJ. It's led by the Civil Rights Division, including the criminal section, which prosecutes hate crimes. It involves the FBI, the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, the Community Relations Service, the Criminal Division, the Office of Justice Programs, the U.S. Attorney's offices. They all play really active roles in this. And I can tell you just about a few of the actions and policies and programs going on under that initiative. AG Garland spoke about FBI hate crimes trainings going on around the country. And part of the reason that those trainings are happening is that there's a whole new system for collecting hate crimes data that's being launched. It's called the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. And the great thing about this new system is it has a dedicated field just for hate crimes. The Attorney General mentioned this problem with underreporting by law enforcement, underreporting by victims. So we're trying to get at both of those problems. When we pair the advent of this new data collection system, NIBRS, with the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act provisions, and those allow us, by the way, to incentivize law enforcement agencies to identify, track, and address unlawful acts of hate. There's just going to be a lot of potential there for increased reporting of hate crimes by law enforcement. And further, this summer, you're going to see something on our hate crimes website and the FBI's hate crimes website, or rather the FBI's website, that's going to allow much greater transparency for hate crimes data. This is called the Hate Crimes Data Explorer, and it's going to allow people to identify the number of hate incidents against Asian American and Pacific Islanders by year, offense, location, victim type, as well as the race and ethnicity of offenders. So the other thing I wanted to mention is the department's recently translated instructions on reporting hate crimes into the most frequently spoken AAPI languages, which you also heard AG Garland say. And we're really just trying to get the word out to the community that they should report all hate incidents, including conduct that may not ultimately rise to the level of a hate crime per se, just report it. These hate incidents can also sometimes be characterized as discrimination. And these can include things like bullying and harassment in K-12 schools, mistreatment in housing and public accommodations. And for members of the community who have limited English proficiency, the inability to access vital information in language that they can understand. So laws prohibiting all that kind of discrimination are enforced by the Civil Rights Division. And our reporting portal can be found at www.civilrights.justice.gov. Anything you can do to share that portal would be wonderful. The COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act also gives DOJ important new rules and tools for increasing victim reporting. The Act supports the establishment of online reporting. It also supports the state-run hate crime hotlines, which we think are really going to increase reporting from victims. One last thing, grant funding. This is really good news. Earlier this month, the department announced a $2 million Helping Victims of Hate Crime and Strengthening Their Communities program. That program is actually going to provide sub-grants to communities dealing with hate crimes and hate incidents. And those sub-grants are for things like their projects. They're projects devoted to promoting awareness, healing, reconciliation, service access, resource development. So all of you community organizations out there, please be aware that those sub-grants are available. Our grant funding also includes the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Program, which was just announced a couple of weeks ago. Those are 13 grants of up to $300,000 over 36 months. They go to law enforcement, but we're encouraging law enforcement to partner with nonprofit organizations like yours, like many of you represent. So again, please look at the website. All of those grants are posted on www.justice.gov/hate crimes, and you can find out more. We look forward to working with the White House Initiative, our federal agency partners, advocates, and all of you as we continue to combat together this scourge of anti-AAPI violence and discrimination. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And it was great to hear the Attorney General provide some additional details on the hate crimes training that are planned for the future. And thank you for highlighting the grants and the addition to the NIBR system for and we look forward to hearing more about that. Okay, let's go next to the White House Equitable Data Working Group. Clarence.
Thank you so much for having me. Clarence Wardell, Senior Advisor for Policy Implementation and Delivery with the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. And today I come representing a few folks on behalf of the Equitable Data Working Group. The two co-chairs for that group are Dr. Alondra Nelson, who is the White House in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as the Deputy Director for Science and Society, and Dr. Margot Schwab, who is the acting U.S. Chief Statistician, who are co-chairs of the Equitable Data Working Group that was established on the first day of the Biden-Harris administration under President Biden's executive order focused on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. This was part of the president's commitment to a whole government approach to advancing equity. I'll just share a little bit about the working group. I think if you've seen the executive order, this was established through there. It names the co-chairs, it names at least kind of the initial members of the working group, but that working group can expand based on other members that the co-chairs choose to add. It was also very expansive, right, in terms of the work and the scope that was given by the president to make recommendations and to pursue work around disaggregation of data and addressing more broadly how we understand, how we use, how we collect data to address issues of equity across the federal government and our programs and policies. And so I'll share just a little bit about how that group has come together, how it's starting to think about and structure some of that work. And then also would certainly invite folks to contribute and provide insight into some of the issues and questions that you would like the group to consider as well. So I'll just say the Equitable Data Working Group, as I mentioned, is tasked with building a strategy for equitable data practices in the federal government, recognizing that federal data are often not available by race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, disability, and a whole host of demographic variables and indicators that one would want to consider to make effective policy that is inclusive of all people. Acquiring the necessary data, either through the collection of new data or by blending information from multiple data sources, is a critical step to ensuring equity is a central component of decision-making across the federal government. This multidisciplinary group, as I mentioned, is composed of key government leaders in programs and policy, statistics, social science, data science, and information technology. And the group is taking initially a case study approach, focusing its efforts on a set of well-defined questions that surface through the group that have been historically difficult to answer because sufficiently disaggregated data do not exist or are not linked in ways that allow for analysis. As an example of this, the working group may consider how disaggregated data can shed light on the distribution of programs and services in underserved communities during the pandemic. For example, how dollars were allocated as part of the CARES Act, and certainly as we move into distribution of resources around the American Rescue Plan, we want to have a good understanding for how those resources flowed, who benefited, who had difficulty accessing those resources and the like. And so to do that, we are looking at how we can assemble data from a range of agencies and programs in order to provide insight across the board, and specifically looking at rural, urban regions, tribal nations, in all manner of geographic areas and demographic groups to understand that crosscut. In each instance, the group aims to focus on high impact data collection and prioritize cases that could create immediate value for local communities, policymakers, community groups, researchers, as well as having broad impact across the federal government. And as I mentioned, our intent here is to use these initial case studies to highlight the specific challenges that need to be addressed. It's our hope that by answering these key data questions, the group will be able to explore ways to leverage underutilized or inaccessible government data in order to measure and promote equity. And for example, in some cases, the data needed to respond to an issue may exist, but there may be some barriers that may make it currently underutilized. As the Equitable Data Working Group examines the depth of data collected, we recognize that it is necessary to consider challenges for unintentional disclosure of personal information and privacy protection, and to grapple with how we can collect data about underserved communities in ways that do not exacerbate their vulnerability, particularly when using or providing public use data with high levels of detail. And when the personal characteristics of survey or program participants can only be made available in restricted access environments to ensure that participant privacy is still taken into consideration. And we seek to develop recommendations for how these restricted access approaches can certainly be more inclusive. Other options of interest that we have been focused on, in part working with Erica, who is now part of that working group, include looking at the urgent collection of data and disaggregation about Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islander communities, as we seek to have more granular and analytic insights and data about those communities that has typically been available before. So I'll leave it there. invite, and I know we'll have a bit of a discussion later, but I should say, and just two things. There's currently, as I mentioned, the working group is part of the whole of government effort on advancing racial equity and advancing equity across the federal government. There's currently a request for information that is out that is seeking input from the community, broadly speaking, around things that we should be considering and things that we should take into account when we consider these various approaches. So I would invite folks who are listening to this to submit comments, ideas for things for consideration through that mechanism. And then I'll also invite that the working group, at the moment, we're trying to develop a process that is fairly robust as we still get up, that is focused on external stakeholder engagement. And so at the moment, we are trying to hold a set of office hours at least 3 to 4 times a month, where we invite external groups to come in and share any insights that they'd like to bring to the group. And lastly, I just say, as I mentioned, we're taking initially a case study approach in trying to probe specific questions. So if there are specific questions, the greater the detail, the better, that you would like to put on the table for the groups, we're certainly open to that. So thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you, Clarence. And we all know that data disaggregation is a long-standing important issue for the community. Thank you for your work. Let's go to NEH, Kelsey.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Kelsey Coates, Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you to WHIAAPI for inviting our agency to participate in this important discussion. As one of the largest funders of humanities programs in the United States, NEH serves our republic promoting the study of history, literature, language, philosophy, archaeology, government, and culture, which give us the capacity to examine the human condition, preserve cultural heritage, foster mutual respect for diverse beliefs and cultures, and promote civic engagement and participation. To date, NEH has awarded nearly $6 billion in grants to build the nation's cultural capital at museums, libraries, colleges and universities, archives, and historical societies. NEH is proud to have funded scholarly research as well as numerous documentaries, podcasts, and exhibitions that bring AA and HPI history and culture to a broad public. It is an honor to support these meaningful projects. We at NEH are committed to continuing to promote and share these initiatives as widely as possible to illuminate the contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to American history and society, and look forward to working with our partners across the federal government as part of a collaborative effort to combat violence, xenophobia, and bias against the AA and HPI community in the United States. Thank you.
Kelsey, thank you so much for your comments. Let's go to NSF next. Dr. Lupia.
Hi, I'm Arthur Lupia. I'm Assistant Director of the National Science Foundation. In that role, I oversee the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. To everyone on this call, thank you. Thank you for your leadership and efforts to reduce bias, eliminate discrimination, expand opportunity, and improve quality of life for every AAPI community. Each new day presents us with an opportunity to do better than we did the day before, and scientific research accelerates our pursuit of this progress. If the long arc of justice, if the long arc of history bends towards justice, it gets there a lot faster when it's informed by science. Today, as mentioned in the AAPI memo that President Biden put out, NSF is supporting over 100 research grants on bias and discrimination, employing hundreds of amazing, diverse scholars all over the country at a cost of over $33 million. The research is amazing. So much of it is about how to convert circumstances of bias and discrimination into outcomes of opportunity, outcomes of safety, outcomes of justice, and outcomes of equality. And we could spend a long time talking about examples, but I'll tell you about a few. Sapna Charian of the University of Washington. is doing work examining new strategies for reducing the frequency and severity of certain types of discrimination. Jeannie Tsai at Stanford University is looking at how to reduce discrimination against Asian Americans in the workplace, where so many times the biases are not based on who you are or what you can do. Charissa Che at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County is looking at research about how to improve responsiveness of all kinds to marginalized communities. Sandra Gonzalez Balone at the University of Pennsylvania is really focusing on hate crimes and how to reduce hate and violence towards the communities that we care about. Crystal James at the Tuskegee Institute is looking at racial disparities in public health information, which we've seen the effects of that in the last year. Lisa Cook at Michigan State and a team at the National Bureau of Economic Research is looking at how to support more diversity in business ownership. These researchers join a long history of people at NSF who've made important discoveries. For example, I don't know if you know, the concept of implicit bias was discovered by NSF-funded researchers. And findings like these energize so many existing efforts, current efforts, to reduce bias, to safeguard against discrimination, and to create opportunity. Indeed, any time we can integrate scientific findings into the rich and diverse tapestry in America of lived experiences, we empower one another, we empower the nation as a whole to improve quality of life for every person in every AAPI community. So thank you for your leadership in this domain. It's an honor to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Lupia. The research that you guys are doing is very exciting, or that you're funding, and I'm really interested personally in the behavioral sciences aspect. So with that, I'm really excited to hear from Kai from OSTP.
It's Kay. Hi.
Kay, excuse me.
Good morning. I'm Kay Koizumi, and I'm really delighted to be with all of my AA and HPI friends this morning. I'm the Chief of Staff and the Acting Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I will note that I'm the first Asian American to hold either of those roles. Indeed, the first person of color to hold either of those roles. So it's especially meaningful for me to have the chance to talk to you today. What does OSTP do? We provide science and technical advice to the president and other White House officials. We try to foster a sustainable, world-leading US science and technology enterprise. And we want to give opportunities to participate in and benefit from science and technology to all Americans. So those are some grand missions, but in day-to-day, my primary job is to support SCIP and the work that science and technology agencies do, and to support Clarence in what the Equitable Data Working Group does. And here's why. Because we have 24 science and technology agencies supporting research in the federal government. And many of them are doing important research of the kind that Skip talked about on understanding better xenophobia, bias, racism, and finding strategies for how we combat this. So I see it as our job to make sure that the results of that research are considered, are in the hands of policymakers as they make decisions for how we as a nation address these longstanding issues. We also know that if we want scientific research, we need better data. And so data disaggregation that you've already heard about is a very important issue for us. And I think that's especially important for the science and technology community of the United States. So you heard from Panch, the director of NSF, about the opportunities the United States has given to him, to my parents who are scientists and engineers, and so many others in the AA and HPI communities to participate in the science enterprise. But we also know that in the data, Asian Americans are well represented in the sciences and engineering, although the bamboo ceiling is real. But we are also beginning to understand that this overall picture of Asian Americans doing very well in the science and engineering masks a lot of differences and different experiences. So Japanese Americans like me, Indian Americans like Punch do relatively well in the sciences and engineering, but we need to understand better the different experiences of Filipino Americans, Southeast Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians, who have very different experiences in the part of our economy that's the sciences and engineering. Only when we get to that disaggregated data can we not only understand, but of course take action to address some of those disparities. And that's why it's really important for OSTP and our science agencies to have data to inform research. And of course, research informs action. And the last point, we're committed to working with the communities that are represented here and with the science agencies to finding more and better ways for all Americans to have the opportunities to participate in science and technology and engineering, and to benefit from science, technology, and engineering, because we know some of the benefits of our advances in technologies are not evenly distributed in the United States, and we have a lot to work we have a lot of work to do in making sure that they are. So I'm, again, very happy to be here. Thank you all for being here, and we're going to work together.
Great, thank you so much, Kay. I'm just noting the time. We have about 15 minutes left, unfortunately, but I do want to give a chance for the community orgs to community leaders here to introduce themselves. We may not have time for the Q&A, but let's get started with our community leaders. And I see the chat is very active too. So if our folks on the speakers here can take a look, a lot of folks are saying thank you for your comments. And okay, so let's go to our first community leader, Greg from AAPI. Please introduce yourself and
good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Greg Orton with the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. We are the umbrella coalition of 37 of the most prominent Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander civil rights organizations in the country. And I just want to express my deep appreciation to the Biden administration, all the senior officials and staff who have made time today to be with us and be with community. It's obviously been a difficult year. And really, my only message is that part of that deep appreciation comes from the fact that there's a real recognition that the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community is not a single issue constituency. Obviously, anti-Asian racism has dominated the headlines and dominated our attention, but there's so many other issues out there. And so it's really heartening to see different parts of the government come together and be marshaled in a way that sort of speaks to the diversity of our community and the fact that there are many issues that we're working on. So again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you all and hope everybody's doing well.
great. Let's go to Tavai next.
Thank you so much for this time. My name is Tavai Samwalu. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Executive Director of Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, also known as EPIC. In addition to that, I serve as the Vice President of APCOM, and you'll meet our Executive Director later. And I'm also a member of the AAPI Executive Committee. I share all these titles with you so you know who I'm in relationship to, but the humans that I'm most accountable to call me Auntie Vi. So I am joining you all from Long Beach, where the original stewards of this land are the Tongva. The other pieces, I'd be remiss if I didn't name and really pay homage to the Pacific Islander leaders who are present here, who laid the foundation for me to be able to do my work. And so Manu Malo Alailima, who founded the Oregon Pacific Islander Coalition. I see Ben Raji on the screen, Becky Lazama, who's been managing the chat, as well as Auntie Claudia Kircher. And I apologize for those that I've been remiss in not naming, but you need to know all of these folks to be really clear that I do not speak on behalf of the entire Pacific Islander community, but I'm honored to be given the opportunity to represent. I also wanted to make sure that I highlight and note, right, that when race and ethnicity data was first released in April 2020, that it showed that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders had the highest rates of COVID amongst any racial or ethnicity group. Over a year later, those numbers remain true. That disaggregated data shows that our communities in 20 of the states that disaggregate data, NHPIs have 16 of them have the highest rates of COVID. That in 11 of them, we have the highest mortality rates. So in naming this, I say that disaggregated data, it really demands a disaggregated and specific response. So I hope and I look forward to working more closely with HHS, with Juliet and Clarence, to talk about these data concerns in measuring the severity of the issues, as well as the efficacy of the problems. And so that we ask not to just disaggregate data, but that your responses and your resources be disaggregated as well, so that we can specifically address the needs of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tavai. Next, we'll go to Juliet from the Health Forum.
Great, thank you so much. Sincere thanks to the administration, all the incredible federal leaders who joined us, and all the community leaders from across the country. Just following the chat, we see folks from not just East and West Coast, but places from the Midwest and beyond. Thank you so much. So I think many folks do know us, but just to be clear and to allow me to introduce myself, I'm Juliet Choi, President and CEO of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. This year, we're celebrating our 35th anniversary. We are the oldest and largest health justice advocacy organization advocating for the health and wellness and well-being of the broader Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities. You may know our legacy of community uplifting and capacity building, as well as our steadfast advocacy, particularly from Washington, D.C., on the critical issues all of us have touched upon over many, many years: language access, disaggregated data, and of course, coverage to healthcare. Focusing more pointedly on at least the duality, the challenges, and the really life-impacting consequences of both the COVID global pandemic and xenophobia and anti-Asian violence. I want to share that last year in the spring of 2020, together with many of you who are joining us today, we collectively launched the formation of the National Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Health Response Partnership. It is a vibrant constellation of 24 local and national partners across the country, with a combined network of over 100 affiliates, chapters, and nearly 300 community-based organizations with a reach across 40 states and the territories. I want to make this conversation as real and concrete as possible and try to share a couple of resources that I'll drop in the chat box momentarily to help our communities get that real-time life-saving information they need. We all need in language, and asking our partners to amplify. Also to counter the xenophobia and anti-Asian violence, which we know has impacted our communities and accessing the care that they want and deserve, and their access to the COVID vaccination. We are setting and leading a new standard in language access, making our vital community information available, I commit to you from the Health Forum, in at least 25 languages or more. So by way of example, this spring, in a new partnership with the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, we launched a community toolkit for community leaders and community members. Our colleagues from DOJ and HHS highlighted these elements, but it's important for our communities to understand why it's important to report incidences of hate crimes and hate incidences, and what that means, and how community leaders can help facilitate that dialogue at the local level. So we created a toolkit available, again, in 25 languages, and I would say 25 Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander languages. Further, in doing our part in partnership with all of you and the administration, this week we have been launching 5 languages every day, helping our families understand how they can make sure they can secure their COVID vaccination by creating a Know Your Rights set of fact cards and Know Your Facts about the COVID vaccination. For those who may be unsure of their rights in securing a COVID vaccination, all of you, like us, have heard that you could have a bad experience when you're seeking your vaccination. This is a vaccination that is free and available to all of our communities, and person to person, family to family, neighbor to neighbor. We need to underscore this, especially with the president's charge of shots in arms by July 4th. So again, we'll drop those resources to you in the chat box, and I look forward to connecting with you If you have ideas or if there are ways we can work with you in government or in community, a really easy email box for us is communityengagement@apiahf.org. Thank you so much.
Great. Next, we'll go to Jeff from APCHO.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeff Javier, and I'm the Executive Director at the Association of Asian Pacific Community Health Organizations. In the interest of time, I'm going to make my comment very brief. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a national membership association of community health organizations, including 29 federally qualified health centers and other CBOs who serve predominantly Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations throughout the country and the Pacific. APCHO's member organizations ensure that linguistically appropriate, culturally competent, quality healthcare services are available to the medically underserved. And we are part of a national network of federally qualified health centers that serve 30 million of the nation's most underserved populations, including 1.5 million Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. Proudly, APCHO's participation in this network has helped ensure that since January, this network has administered nearly 10.9 million COVID vaccines, with over 62% of those vaccines being provided to racial or ethnic minority populations. Of the total 10.9 million vaccines administered, nearly 12%, or more than 1.1 million doses, had been administered to Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, or Pacific Islanders. My point in this session is that many more Asian Americans, Asian immigrants, and Native Hawaiian Pacific populations are still facing numerous challenges in accessing the healthcare system and receiving the vaccine. A majority of underserved Asians and Asian Americans are foreign born and are about 40% limited English proficient. We need to help make sure that resources for trusted messengers at the local level are available for our at-risk Asian immigrant, Asian American, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. We do have 6 more community leaders to introduce, so please keep that in mind. We only have 5 minutes, so you can do the math. Let's go next to Chelsea.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Chelsea Blake, the Director of External Affairs at the National Federation of Filipino American Associations, or NAFA for short. In the interest of time, I will drop some of the summary points in the chat. We are the largest affiliation of Filipino American institutions, umbrella organizations, and individuals dedicated to promoting the welfare and well-being of over 4 million Filipino and Filipino Americans throughout the United States and our territories. We want to thank the Biden administration for their hard work and support and inviting us to speak today on the work that we're doing to address hate crimes. Our leadership has developed a task force in response to the unfortunately very gruesome and highly visible attacks on some members in our community. The point that we want to emphasize is, one, to elevate and support all the points made by our A and NHPI brothers and sisters on the call today, but also to emphasize that there is a unique relationship between the Philippines and the United States that directly impacts Filipino Americans, whether they're first-generation immigrants or beyond. We would like to emphasize the importance of the administration to educate themselves on the history and the unique position with Filipino Americans within the United States, while further developing strategies to implement President Biden's actions against AAPI hate. We would like to offer ourselves as a resource and welcome dialogue from anybody within the administration. And we thank you so much for your time. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Manju.
Thanks so much, Laura, for hosting today's event and for the leadership of WHIAAPI. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Manju Kulkarni, and I'm part of APCON, the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council. We're a coalition of over 40 community-based organizations that together serve and represent the 1.5 million AAPIs in Los Angeles County. We're proud to have EPIC as one of our leading members and Tavai on our board of directors. In March 2020, we co-founded Stop AAPI Hate with Chinese for Affirmative Action in San Francisco State University. And now as the nation's leading aggregator, we have received over 6,600 incident reports from all across the country, sadly impacting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders across ethnicities, and having particular impact on Asian American women who've borne the brunt of the violence. Today, we release a report on the mental health impacts on our communities of this racism and discrimination. And we look forward to working with the administration to address anti-AAPI hate and discrimination, and working with you moving forward to address it as well as prevent it from happening in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let's go next to Jennifer from NAPA.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much to Laura and all of the many other leaders throughout the administration who have recognized the intersectional nature of racism and sexism that AAPI women and girls have experienced, not only during the pandemic, but before as well. I'm Jennifer Wang. I'm the Deputy Director of Programs with the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, or NAPAF. We're the only organization focused on building power with AAPI women and girls to influence critical decisions that are being made about our lives, our families, and our communities. We work intersectionally using a reproductive justice framework to work on issues like racial justice, like healthcare, immigrant rights, economic empowerment. Just earlier this week, we put out a new updated report finding that Asian American and Pacific Islander women are still twice as likely to report experiencing a targeted hate incident when compared to men. The report, in collaboration between NAPAF and Stop AAPI Hate, we, in partnership with Stop AAPI Hate, re-examined the data that they have been collecting, and also re-examined the data from our poll from March, and found that hate incidents, including verbal harassment, avoidance, shunning, being coughed at, spat on, physical assault, workplace discrimination, vandalism, getting barred from establishments or transport, and online harassment are still ongoing, and they're ongoing in an intersectional way. 78% of AAPI women reported being affected by anti-Asian racism, violence, and sexism over the past 2 years, and more than half have personally encountered specific instances. So my question for you all is, can you share how you measure success intersectionally, not just by race and ethnicity, which we know is important, but also by gender and other factors? Because at NAPAF, we know that people do not lead single issue lives, and we urge the government to approach policy and structural change in a siloed manner that does not ignore gender. How are you already using this framework, and how do you wish to improve?
Great, Jennifer, and we will continue to address that question. Let's go next to Ginny.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you, WHIAAPI, for organizing all of this and all the time that I know Laura and Becky have put into making this happen. Thank you so much. So my name is Ginny Kim, Vice President for Policy and Programs with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We're a national civil rights organization dedicated to advancing the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and building and promoting a fair and equitable society for all. What I'll do is shortcut straight to our current priorities on addressing anti-hate and the rise in anti-Asian violence. And currently our priorities are, one, now with the passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, the implementation of that act, as well as the implementation of the presidential memorandum. And this includes ensuring that AAPI community organizations are part of that implementation process, and that community organizations have the support and resources to engage in aiding government agencies at the federal, state, and local levels in shaping those policies and practices to improve response and handling of hate crimes and hate incidents, and responding to hate incidents that impact the diverse communities that they serve, and to better provide holistic support services to improve community well-being and supporting community healing, and including ensuring robust language access throughout this process. So we really urge, all the amazing government leaders on this call to engage with us and with Asian Americans serving local community organizations as this implementation process proceeds, because both in terms of cultural competency, language access, as well as knowing the communities and what the communities are facing on the ground, the local community orgs and we as national advocates have the expertise to help inform the policies that you will be rolling out in this implementation, because now that we have the victory in the passage of the law, and the devil's in the details, and the hard work starts now. And so, we offer ourselves as a resource and to connect you to local organizations on the ground doing amazing work, cross-racial coalition building, anti-racism, anti-hate work in local communities across the country. We have a network of 250 community partners nationally, as well as our affiliates. And that's one thing I want to lift up. The second priority, infrastructure building for community resources, right? Working with this network to make sure that our communities are resourced to provide the services needed. And of course, third is about building a national consciousness and the recognition of Asian Americans as integral to the fabric of American society through Asian American history being taught universally at the K-12 level. And we have the Asian American Education Project, which we recently launched, which works toward that goal. And so we encourage you to reach out to us, reach out to me. Everyone knows John Yang, my boss, so reach out to him. Please, we encourage you to work with community orgs because we know our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for those who are hanging on. We're gonna go until we have all our community leaders present. We have two more important leaders. Sim from the Sikh Coalition, we thank you for joining us today, and our thoughts are with your community due to the San Jose shootings yesterday. Sim.
Thank you to the WHIAAPI and senior administration officials in attendance for today's event. My name is Sim J. Singh, and I serve as the Sikh Coalition's Senior Policy and Advocacy Manager, and I will try to keep this short as well. Through the community, courtroom, classrooms, and halls of Congress, the Sikh Coalition works to protect the constitutional right to practice one's faith without fear. And the Sikh Coalition is the nation's largest Sikh American advocacy community development organization, and we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Today, our robust services provide premier legal, policy, educational, and community development support to at least 500,000 Sikhs. And we work to create safer schools, prevent hate and discrimination, create equal employment opportunities, and empower the Sikh community to educate the American public about the Sikh faith and traditions. And as some of you may know, Sikhs maintain a physical identity that makes us stand out in public, even in South Asia. And this identity includes the 5 articles of faith, which include unshorn hair and the most visible aspect of the Sikh identity, the turban, which can be worn by both women and men alike. Unfortunately, the FBI's reporting documents a rise in hate crimes against Sikhs and other communities over the last few years. However, due to systemic underreporting, there remains a significant gap in this data. And the reality on the ground is that Sikhs and other minority communities in the United States need action. Sikhs have lived in the United States for more than a century, and despite making all these vital contributions to life and culture and economy for many generations, there still remains widespread ignorance within the community. And our surveys show that Sikhs continue to experience unacceptably high rates of hate violence, employment discrimination, school bullying, and profiling. So what would we like the Biden-Harris administration to do about this? Far too often, we're seeing inaction on hate crime enforcement. And what that signals to the targeted and impacted communities is that justice on the inflicted communities is not worth pursuing. Sikhs and so many other communities bear witness to hate crimes, and we're left feeling hopeless and the impression that combating the issue is not a priority. We would like to see more leadership from the federal government to ensure that hate crime laws on the books at the state and federal level are upheld. And secondly, we hope that the Biden-Harris administration will take lead on ensuring that the NIBRS transition will also encourage law enforcement to collect more information that captures victim identity as bias motive, and victim identity may not always be congruent in these situations. Too often, our community is not aware of the true scope of the threat we face as a result of misclassification, bias crimes from law enforcement, or mistaken identity. And with that, I will also make sure for policymakers who are in attendance here today, If you want to know more about the Sikh community and their civil rights priorities at the federal and state level, I would recommend that they visit our policy priorities brief entitled Combating Bias, Bigotry, and Backlash. If you need to get in touch with us, please email us at advocacy@sikhcoalition.org. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sim, for sharing your resources there. Let's move to our last speaker today, Kieran from SALDEF, and our thoughts are with the Sikh community as well.
Thank you. And I appreciate you giving me time. I know we're running a little bit behind here. My name is Kieran Gill, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. SALDEF. SALDEF is a national Sikh American media policy, research, and education organization, and we're based here in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to build dialogue, deepen understanding, promote civic and political participation, and uphold social justice and religious freedom. One of the areas that we also focus on, as alluded to earlier, is hate crime response. And as I shared earlier, I was on the ground in Indianapolis for 10 days after the recent mass shooting, which took the lives of 4 community members. SALDEF has conducted research on both the broader perception of Sikh Americans and the daily experience of Sikh Americans. In 2020, SALDEF launched the first ever National Sikh American Survey, capturing details on the demographics, political affiliations, opinions on social issues, and personal experiences and behaviors of Sikh Americans. Among key findings is that 58% of Sikh Americans have been discriminated against. In 2012, SALDEF partnered with the Stanford University Peace and Innovation Lab to conduct the first ever national survey of the public perception of Sikh Americans and their articles of faith. And as Sim alluded to, one of the articles of faith is a turban. The report was called Turban Myths, and among the key findings was that 70% of Americans had a negative perception of the Sikh articles of faith. I wanted to offer to this group that SALDEF has 25 years of collecting data on discrimination and hate crimes against our community. And if that can be in any way helpful in informing the larger discussion around hate crimes, we'd be happy to share that data. I had some questions, and I'll just maybe phrase it in the form of a statement before I end. I know it was alluded to earlier that DOJ has updated its hate crime websites to be accessible in a variety of AAPI languages. However, Punjabi is still not one of those languages. And given the disproportionate amount of hate crimes targeted against the Sikh American community, we would ask that DOJ would consider including Punjabi as a language accessible on its website. The other thing that I just wanted to share feedback on is that we have been in discussions that community members should report both criminal and non-criminal bias acts against them, reports of discrimination. However, community oftentimes doesn't get feedback on what happens with those reports. So I would ask that that be considered because that would certainly help the community continue to report. And I understand that information, whether it is a criminal bias or non-criminal bias, is helpful in determining future potential acts against community members, whether it's the Sikh American community or other minority communities. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Kieran. And yes, unfortunately, we are out of time. But I think everyone in the audience could see that there is so much good work going on. We've highlighted some important issues from the President's API fact sheet. And although we've run out of time, the good news is that this conversation continues. And we hope to engage with everybody here on the screen and with our audience. Thank you so much for the robust chats and comments and feedback and emails and connections that are happening on the chat as well. We want to engage with you as much as we can. And everybody here, thank you so much for your participation today as we wrap up May Heritage Month. It's gone by so fast, but there's been a lot happening. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.